What beliefs in our culture do you believe give rise to the violence toward women? And what keeps these attitudes in place over time? After being harmed by gender-based violence, is it even possible to authentically forgive the perpetrator? And what does that mean to truly forgive? My guest today is uniquely qualified to explore these questions along with other issues related to forgiveness and reconciliation. Hi, this is Marlena Fiol from Becoming Who We Truly Are, a YouTube show that deepens our understanding of who we are and also who we can become. If you find value in this video, please give it a thumbs up or click the subscribe button on your screen. It makes a big difference. And for a look into my own life journey and the challenging lessons I learned along the way, we recommend my memoir, Nothing Bad Between Us, as well as our new historical novel, Called. The web addresses for each of these are in the show notes below. I'm very pleased to introduce today's guest, Thordis Elva. Thordis is an Icelandic author, speaker, playwright, and activist for gender equality. She was voted the Woman of the Year in 2015 by the Federation of Icelandic Women Societies in Reykjavik. She specializes in violence prevention and has helped shape national policy on online abuse as well as gender-based violence. In 2017, Thordis became one of the front runners of the Me Too revolution in Iceland, accepting the Person of the Year award in 2017 on behalf of the Me Too movement. Her best-known book is Selfforgiveness. It's a documentation of her sexual assault and journey to healing. But here's the most important piece. Thordis collaborated on this book with her perpetrator, Tom Stranger, making her the first rape survivor in the world to publicly do this. And for me, that's where the story's power lies, in the fact that it's told from both of their perspectives. I believe that forgiveness and reconciliation are paths to healing and for finding our truest selves. Over and in different ways, my guests are addressing the question, what does it really mean to forgive? I'm sure you already agree, based on what I've told you, that Thordis really is uniquely qualified to explore this question, along with other issues related to forgiveness and reconciliation. At the end of this brief interview, we'll provide additional recommendations of informative programs about paths to healing and forgiveness. Thordis, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Let's begin with what happened the night of the Christmas dance in 1996, and then also about the dark years that followed.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. A trigger warning is in place. So I was 16 years old. I felt very grown up having my life's first boyfriend, Tom Stranger, who is this Australian exchange student, which to me was very exotic. It's as far away from Iceland on the planet as is possible. And so yeah, it all felt very, very grown up. And as a result, I, being headed to my first school dance with my first boyfriend, felt that it was also in order to have my first go at alcohol. And so not really knowing how to drink responsibly, I got very intoxicated that night to the point where I was incapacitated. So instead of having this first sort of adult experience of enjoying a school dance out of sight of my parents or guardians, it ended up being quite a nightmarish scenario where I was sick in the toilets basically all night. But my boyfriend, Tom, came to my rescue, and I remember feeling frustrated with myself not being able to utter the words, "thank you," as he carried me to a taxi and took me home. But that gratitude that I felt being rescued sort of by this, knight in shining armor took a very sharp turn when we came home, and he instead used or abused this situation and instead sexually assaulted me in this helpless situation I was in when I was not in a situation to consent that was sexual assault. So it took me a long time to come to terms with that. And by the time that I'd reached that conclusion, he had completed his exchange program and was already on the other side of the planet. So, but I was stuck with a lot of self-blame and shame. Sexual assault was not much talked about at the time, and certainly not that it happened within relationships in the way that it did in my case. We were barely scratching the surface of stranger danger, where it's like someone that's lurking in a parking lot or in the bushes or something. That sort of scenario was what we commonly saw in popular culture in terms of sexual assault. So I guess I carried the blame and shame for Tom that rightfully belonged to him. And that's why I call it my dark period or my dark years, because it certainly tainted my self-image and the way I carried myself in the world, and also led to some destructive coping mechanisms.
Yeah, you were 16 when the rape occurred. 9 years later, at the age of 25, you contacted Tom by email. Why did you contact him?
Right. So, as you say, 9 years later, I one day was having one of 1,000 fights because my relationships were frayed with tension as I was carrying a secret. And so I was having one of very many frequent fights with my then boyfriend, and I stormed out the door. I was blinded by tears, and I got in my car, and I just wanted to drive somewhere and sit by myself. And I ended up at a cafe that I never frequented, so I felt pretty safe about not bumping into someone. And I sat down by a table, and I took out my notebook, and I was just going to doodle in it to try and calm my nerves. But to my surprise, this letter of confrontation just streamed out of my pen, addressed to Tom, this first boyfriend of mine who had wronged me so deeply and marked my life in such a fateful way. And the thing about the letter was that it was so fully shaped. There was not a single word misplaced in it. So it was almost like my subconscious had been working on it, even though I hadn't consciously been thinking about it. And I was really surprised by this because I had not been thinking about Tom at all. And I wasn't having my fights with him, obviously. My fight was with someone else. So it was, all of it was very confusing to me, but something fell into place that day. And I decided this is a newfound voice that I didn't know I had, and I want to give wings to it. I don't want to silence this part of me that's just broken through the surface. So I need to do something about this and send this to the rightful owner. I had a 9-year-old Hotmail address, and I decided to send the letter. I didn't think I would get a response, honestly. I thought that maybe I would be met with silence. Maybe he didn't even use the address anymore. And in like best scenario would be him responding, but I wasn't very hopeful that it would be a positive response.
What did you say in that email?
Just to conclude, I thought that he would, try to deny it if he would at all respond. But in the email, I basically walked him through the events of that fateful night after the Christmas dance where he sexually assaulted me, and how that had impacted my life and how heavy the consequences had been for me. And and that I needed to place that burden with him because I was tired of carrying it. It was never mine to carry in the first place. Of course, I was angry, and I expressed that in this email. But first and foremost, it was a confrontation and a way for me to give voice to the fact that what happened that night was his responsibility alone. And despite me having had a short skirt and been drunk and done things that are commonly held against women and girls that are taken advantage of or sexually assaulted, that did not make me in any way deserving of his actions.
Yeah.
So that was basically the gist of this email. And he responded in the only way that I had not predicted, to my surprise. But as opposed to either ignoring my mail or responding in some negative way, calling me a liar or trying to deny his actions, he actually responded with a confession that, yes, he had very much done this and he was aware of it, and he too had carried it for all these years and been marked by it, and that we had in certain ways actually lived quite parallel lives that were marked by self-hatred and shame.
Yeah. So after 8 years of communicating via email, you arranged to meet in Cape Town, South Africa for a week to discuss the impact of his violent actions on both of your lives. Whose idea was this?
When he responded and was so willing to own up to his actions, I realized that I had this golden opportunity that I think every survivor longs for, and it's the chance to ask the $1 million question: why? Why did you do this to me? And that question became a very lengthy analysis, not only of the influences that had shaped Tom's ideas and his actions before he committed this crime toward me, but also, the impact and consequences on both of us afterward. Because violence doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens very much as a piece in a larger puzzle. And if we want to understand and uproot violence, we have to look at the whole picture. But after 8 years of diving into this and analyzing it, and with Tom being incredibly sorry for what he'd done, I felt that I'd come as far as I could on paper. Mm-hmm. And there's a certain empowering feeling that comes with speaking your truth, to actually use your voice and say things out loud. It has tremendous power.
Yes.
And in some way, I think it's also a release. And writing, after all, is a silent format. So I felt that for me to have true closure, I literally had to face my past. So I suggested we'd meet in the middle. Again, Australia and Iceland are as far apart as possible on the planet. And it turned out that South Africa was right in the middle. So that's where we met to try and liberate ourselves once and for all from that fateful night, which had such immense meaning and impact on our lives.
Naturally, you both had fears and trepidations about this meeting. What was your biggest fear?
I suppose reopening old wounds was my biggest fear. I was not afraid of Tom at all. He had spent 8 years being very repentant and repeatedly stating a wish to make it up to me.
Yeah. What were some of the most significant moments of that week for you?
I suppose walking into the eye of the storm, so to speak, to discuss the core of my pain that had been so costly for me. That was really challenging, more challenging than I actually envisioned it being, but also at the same time very liberating to come through to the other side, having visited your most wounded places and really took your fear by the horns. But I also feel the need to say that although it worked for me, it's not something I preach as a solution for other people, or like some sort of cookie cutter methodology at all, because of course my story is unique in a sense, and the fact that I had someone abuse me who was then later on willing to accept his responsibility and was no longer an abusive person.
Yeah, yeah. Were there any surprises as the chapters came together of your book?
Yes, the whole decision to write the book did not come easy, and it was certainly not something I had in mind when I set out on this journey at all. It was actually Tom that first put it into words, that some of the lessons we had learned during what was then, almost half of our lives, 16 years since the night of the school dance, that they were simply too valuable not to try and share them, in the hope that hearing a story like ours might help someone else, and possibly even prevent people from doing something like Tom did, something of a similar nature, to think that they were entitled to another human being's body, for example, and to be a contribution to this global dialogue about consent and about what sexual violence looks like.
So Thordis, you have your own incredible personal forgiveness journey. I have to ask you, how do you define forgiveness today?
I feel it's an emotional process that you only have so much control of. It's not unlike heartache, actually. You can't simply decide to stop loving someone at the drop of a hat. Because if it were that easy, the concept of heartache wouldn't exist. Because healing a broken heart takes time. And I think the same goes for forgiveness. You can't simply decide to stop feeling hurt after someone has done you wrong. I think it was Desmond Tutu, the former Archbishop of South Africa. I think it was him who said that if you are in a state of anger toward your perpetrator, it's a form of being chained to them almost. So for some people, finding a way to let go of the anger is like freeing yourself from that shackle or from those chains. But as I said before, I've also learned through listening to people and studying this from hundreds of different angles, that for some people, the anger itself and the distance is a form of healing.
Some people have spoken on this podcast and said that some acts are simply unforgivable, period. Do you believe that's true?
No, I don't. I actually entirely reject that notion, because that would imply that other people could decide for you what's forgivable or unforgivable. And I think, honestly, I think that's impossible and arrogant at the same time. So I think it's incredibly important that we grant that permission and that right to everyone who's ever been wronged or traumatized, that they have a right to heal, and nobody else can tell you or dictate for you what your healing journey is supposed to look like.
Yeah. In your book, you quote an 84-year-old woman who claimed that people only forgive when they have to. What did she mean by that?
Yeah, that was such an eye-opening thing to hear, and an example of what I mean with forgiveness being this, ever elusive concept. But she wanted to maintain this theory that forgiveness does not come naturally to people. What we tend to do is we tend to avoid rather than actually process. So she sort of like painted that picture that it's only when we're in a state of necessity that we forgive. And I guess that that also explains why we're more likely to forgive our family or our loved ones because we can't just choose away our family. We can't just like go to a different gas station and get a new family. Like we have to make it work. There are certainly countless examples of people that have not forgiven their family, and that was the right decision for them. But I'm saying, in the minor things in life,
Yeah.
I suppose we are more forgiving towards the people that we don't wish to choose away, and that is harder to cut out of our lives. So she basically stated that we need motivation to forgive because it's hard work.
So one of the other guests on this podcast, Phil Cousineau, he's edited a book called Beyond Forgiveness, and one of his contributors argues that all forgiveness is really self-forgiveness. What does that mean to you?
Well, I would certainly recognize myself in that, because for me, I guess the hardest obstacle to overcome was forgiving myself for all the self-blame that I'd carried for so long. I think forgiveness is a very deeply misunderstood concept because many people seem to think that it's something you give the perpetrator. It's something you hand over to them, almost like a blessing, that what they did was okay. I don't see it like that at all. I see that forgiveness to me is actually underlining the hurt. It's not laying your blessing over the hurt. It's acknowledging that the hurt was painful and costly, but that you don't want it to dictate your life anymore.
I'm so glad you raised that issue, because so often I hear, how can we forgive and let go of our desire for revenge and at the same time hold accountable the perpetrators of violent actions? Mm-hmm. And you're saying that, in fact, forgiveness does hold the perpetrators accountable.
Exactly, because if there weren't accountability and blame embedded in forgiveness, then there'd be nothing to forgive.
Yes. Thordis, if there were one last thing you'd like our listeners to know, to hear from you, what would it be?
I think it would be my core message, which is if someone has hurt you, wronged you, you have a right to your pain. You have a right to figure out a way to heal that supports you, that feels safe for you. And you're not alone. There are many ways in which to receive support. And if you're like me, someone who's been abused or violated, then there are certainly services at your avail. And it's just one click away, usually.
This has been a very meaningful conversation. Thordis, thank you for taking the time to speak with me.
It's been a pleasure that was mostly, if not entirely, mine.
If you found value in this program, please do give it a thumbs up or click the subscribe button on your screen. It does matter. And if you'd like to listen to my full hour-long interview with Thordis Elva, the web address can be found in the show notes below. In addition, just so you know, I'll be posting a new episode of this YouTube show each Tuesday at 6 a.m. Eastern Time. Also, please post your comments or any questions you might have for me. I am interested and I will respond promptly. For example, have you chosen to forgive people who've abused you in the past? And has this been helpful in your journey toward healing? For those of you who are deeply engaged in your own quest to becoming who you truly are, let me just say that my path may not be the best path for you. It's been a way forward for me to move toward increasing levels of peace in my own life, but naturally only you can decide what path best fits your needs. For further information about paths to healing after suffering abuse, we recommend the following resources. First, a TEDx presentation by Lydia Ward on how sexual abuse and rape can be the making, not the breaking of you. And a TEDx talk by Rina Romano about healing from sexual abuse. And finally, for a look at my own personal experiences with abuse and forgiveness, we recommend my memoir, Nothing Bad Between Us, as well as our new historical novel, Called. The web addresses of each of these are in the show notes. And remember, we are together on this journey.